Bye-bye, Meghan Markle. With love, Netflix. Yep.
Decided not to renew its $100 million deal with Harry and Meghan. Kinsey, this is a big blow for Meghan. This was a serious project.
There was no press release, no dramatic announcement, no farewell statement, just absence. When Netflix quietly unveiled its 2026 slate, a carefully curated list designed to reassure investors and audiences alike, one name was conspicuously missing. With Love, Meghan did not appear.
Harry and Meghan's Netflix deal finally did, with bosses just waiting for the credits to roll on the $100 million contract with no appetite for anything new after dismal viewing figures. Is done playing royalty. Shooter Scoop can confirm Meghan Markle's multi-million-dollar streaming deal will not be renewed when it expires. While still technically active, insiders say the streamer is quietly preparing to sever ties once the clock runs out.
Not in development, not delayed, not even quietly sidelined. It was simply gone. In the streaming world, silence is rarely accidental, and this silence spoke volumes. The end of Meghan Markle and Prince Harry's once celebrated Netflix partnership didn't arrive with scandal or spectacle. It arrived the way most corporate recalibrations do, through spreadsheets, performance metrics, and a hard reassessment of value. Not with a bang, but with a decision. To understand how a deal once rumored to be worth 9 figures quietly unraveled, you have to look beyond headlines and into how Netflix itself has changed.
Key of the family. There's leaking, but there's also planting of stories.
There was a war against Meghan to suit other people's agendas.
It's about hatred.
The platform that once chased prestige and cultural relevance at any cost has entered a different era. Today's Netflix is driven by efficiency, completion rates, and repeat engagement. Name recognition still matters, but only if it translates into sustained viewer behavior. And that's where the trouble began.
Like a story about someone in the family would pop up for a minute, and they go, we gotta make that go away. But there's real estate. On a website homepage, there is real estate there. On a newspaper front cover.
Early Sussex projects benefited from intense curiosity. Audiences tuned in not necessarily because of the content, but because of who was attached to it. That curiosity, however, proved fleeting. Internal performance data reportedly showed a pattern Netflix executives know well. Viewers sampled episodes, but didn't always finish them. Engagement spiked briefly, then tapered off. In streaming economics, that distinction is everything. A viewer who watches once is a headline. A viewer who stays is a business model. As Netflix tightened budgets and began cutting underperforming projects across every genre, royal novelty was no longer a protective shield. Archwell Productions was evaluated the same way every other partner was, by output, efficiency, and scalability. The results raised uncomfortable questions. Executives reportedly debated whether the Sussex content strategy could evolve beyond personal narrative-driven storytelling into something broader, something capable of sustaining audience interest across demographics. While other high-profile partners diversified into scripted series, documentaries, and global formats, much of the Sussex catalog remained closely tied to their own experiences. That tether limited replay value, and replay value is the currency of streaming.
In yet another huge loss of revenue for the couple who are possibly about as popular as acne.
At the same time, Archwell's internal operations came under scrutiny. The company launched with sweeping promises to amplify unheard voices and produce meaningful global stories, but struggled to establish a consistent creative identity. Delays, staff turnover, and a narrow pipeline of deliverables reinforced perceptions that the operation lacked the infrastructure of a mature studio. Without a steady cadence of releases, exclusivity became difficult to justify. Comparisons were inevitable. Other celebrity-led production companies proved that personal brand could be a launchpad, not a ceiling.
There's a sigh of relief from the royal family in that there's no more of these documentaries.
Yeah.
I think there's a sigh of relief from viewers.
In contrast, Netflix insiders reportedly saw Archwell as stalled between mission and execution. The ambition was there. The follow-through was inconsistent. Publicly, the restructuring of the deal was framed as a natural evolution. Privately, industry observers read it for what it was, a downgrade. The shift from guaranteed exclusivity to a first-look arrangement fundamentally altered the power dynamic. Netflix was no longer betting on the Sussex brand. It was keeping its options open. And that distinction matters, because when exclusivity disappears, so does insulation. Projects must now compete on merit alone, not symbolism, not status, not narrative momentum from the past. For Meghan Markle and Prince Harry, this moment marked more than a contractual adjustment. It marked a turning point, the transition from protected prominence to competitive exposure. The system didn't reject them, it simply stopped bending. And that reality sets the stage for everything that follows. A far more precarious chapter defined by scrutiny, financial recalibration, and an urgent need to prove relevance in an industry that no longer treats anyone as untouchable. The question now isn't whether the Netflix era is over. It's whether what comes next can stand without it.
Meghan Markle and Prince Harry may leave Montecito and move to Florida.
Unsure how to start her first to-the-camera confessional for the Netflix documentary Harry and Meghan, which launched its first 3 episodes on Thursday, but the duo seemed to have a very clear focus for the 6-part series.
What ultimately doomed the Netflix partnership wasn't a single failed project, nor a sudden loss of favor. It was something far less dramatic and far more unforgiving. Data. Inside Netflix, decisions are not driven by headlines or public debate. They're driven by behavior. What viewers click, how long they stay, whether they finish what they start. And over time, those numbers began telling a story the Sussex brand could no longer outrun.
Spend, £100 million over 5 years for any more. I mean, I think the issue is, I think both sides wanted to move away. I think the Sussexes want to move in a different direction.
Early releases benefited from intense curiosity. Millions pressed play, eager to see what the Duke and Duchess would reveal next. But curiosity is not loyalty, and Netflix's internal metrics made that distinction painfully clear. Viewers sampled, they didn't stay. Completion rates dropped. Repeat engagement softened. The audience didn't disappear, but it failed to return.
Netflix documentaries like that, and they've tried the two with Love Meghan.
In streaming economics, that's the difference between momentum and decline. As Netflix shifted its corporate strategy toward efficiency and profitability, legacy appeal lost its protective power. High-cost partnerships were re-examined. Every title had to justify its budget, not through prestige, but through performance. And when executives compared Archwell's output to other high-profile partners, the contrast was stark. Where some studios diversified across genres, formats, and tones, Archwell's content remained tightly bound to personal narrative. Stories anchored in grievance, identity, and self-reflection can be powerful, but they rarely scale. They don't invite repeat viewing. They don't expand audiences. And most critically, they don't evolve. Internally, questions began to surface. Could this brand move beyond its origin story? Could it generate ideas that didn't rely on proximity to royalty? Could it create content that stood on its own without the gravitational pull of controversy? The answers, increasingly, were inconclusive. At the same time, Archwell's internal structure drew scrutiny. Production schedules slipped. Staff turnover became noticeable. The pipeline thinned. What had launched with bold ambitions struggled to establish a consistent creative identity. Without a steady cadence of releases, exclusivity became difficult to justify. Netflix doesn't wait for potential. It rewards execution. As budget discipline tightened across the platform, Archwell was no longer insulated by novelty. The Sussex name, once seen as a cultural disruptor, became a variable. Valuable, but volatile. And volatility is expensive. Publicly, the recalibration was framed as evolution. Privately, it was understood as a downgrade. The shift away from guaranteed exclusivity changed the power dynamic completely. Netflix wasn't committing to the brand anymore. It was reserving the right to pass. For Meghan Markle and Prince Harry, this marked a profound shift. Their post-royal strategy had relied on institutional partnerships that provided both income and legitimacy. Those partnerships didn't just fund projects. They validated relevance. When Netflix stepped back, that validation softened. The consequences rippled outward. Without predictable backing, every future pitch carried more risk. Development slowed. Hiring became cautious. Long-term planning grew uncertain. High-profile production companies are expensive to maintain even when nothing is filming. And without guaranteed pipelines, sustainability becomes a question rather than an assumption.
Just isn't there anymore, one source says. They went from buzzy to background noise.
Brand analysts also noted a deeper issue: audience fatigue. Supporters remained loyal, but the casual middle, the viewers who drive mass engagement, began drifting away. The public conversation hardened into polarized camps, leaving little space for neutral curiosity. And neutrality is where platforms find scale. This wasn't rejection, it was exposure. For the first time since leaving royal life, the Sussex brand was operating without institutional insulation. No palace, no guaranteed distributor, no automatic amplification. Just performance, measured quietly and relentlessly. And in that environment, symbolism no longer bends the system.
In this, I don't think she can ever set foot in this country again, can she?
No, I think the clever thing that Harry's done, if we ever say that he does clever things...
I've never heard those two words together for a while, Harry and clever, but we'll go with it.
What Netflix did wasn't dramatic. It was procedural. But procedure, in an industry governed by metrics, can be more decisive than scandal. Because it doesn't argue. It simply moves on. And that shift, subtle, strategic, irreversible, is what truly defines this moment. By the time Netflix's pullback became visible to the public, the real damage had already begun behind the scenes. What the headlines framed as a deal adjustment was, in reality, the moment the Sussex brand lost its structural center. For years, Meghan Markle and Prince Harry operated with a rare advantage: institutional insulation. Their post-royal pivot was cushioned by long-term partnerships that absorbed delays, experimentation, and uneven performance. Netflix wasn't just a distributor, it was an anchor. And once that anchor loosened, pressure points emerged everywhere else. High-profile media ventures are expensive even in silence. Staff salaries, development costs, security, legal infrastructure, production overhead. Without guaranteed pipelines, every month becomes a calculation. And according to industry observers, that calculation grew increasingly uncomfortable. What made the situation more complex was timing. The broader entertainment industry was undergoing its own reckoning. Streaming platforms were abandoning prestige-first strategies in favor of repeatable formats, serialized storytelling, and content that encourages habitual viewing. Escapism, not introspection. Momentum, not monologue. This left the Sussex brand misaligned with the moment. Purpose-driven storytelling had once been a competitive edge. Now it struggled to find oxygen inside platforms prioritizing binge behavior and global scalability. Projects that might have succeeded 5 years earlier now felt stranded between categories. Too personal to scale, too costly to niche. Internally, this forced difficult conversations. Could the brand evolve without abandoning its identity? Could future projects distance themselves from grievance without losing authenticity? Could the audience be expanded without reigniting controversy? Each option carried risk.
Looks like the Duchess of Sussex's torturously dull lifestyle dross has been switched off forever as her $100 million deal with the streaming giant fizzles out.
Brand analysts point to a narrowing margin for error. Where early missteps were forgiven under the glow of reinvention, later ones compounded skepticism. The narrative of disruption gave way to repetition. The story didn't change, only the audience's patience did. And patience in the attention economy is finite. At the same time, public trust became more fragile. Years of confessional storytelling created intimacy, but also fatigue. Viewers who once felt invested began craving distance. Not hostility, just something different, something lighter, something new. This is the paradox the Sussex brand now faces. The very openness that built engagement has begun to limit it. Commentators argue this moment isn't punitive. It's corrective. The industry is reasserting its rules. Influence must be earned repeatedly. Prestige cannot substitute for performance. Moral authority does not guarantee watch time. And unlike earlier conflicts, there is no antagonist to confront. No palace to blame, no tabloids to discredit, no institution to rebel against. The forces at play are structural. Algorithms, completion rates, budget ceilings. These forces don't respond to statements or counter-narratives. They respond only to results.
He's got to
Oh, he
plan.
hasn't got a plan, he's got to plan.
He's got to plan for the future.
Because I'll
And-
tell you one thing that I believe fervently, and you're the royal correspondent. My old man, as you know, worked for the Queen Mother for a long, long time.
That's what makes this chapter uniquely precarious. Financially, the implications are manageable, but constraining. The Sussexes are far from insolvency, but the era of open-ended premium guarantees appears to be closing. Analysts suggest the next phase will require diversification. Smaller projects, lower risk, steadier output. Less spectacle, more craft. Yet, that shift demands humility. And humility is difficult for brands built on exceptionalism. Speculation now surrounds potential pivots. International broadcasters, educational platforms, independent production models. Each offers opportunity, but none replicate the scale or protection Netflix once provided. Visibility will need to be earned, not assumed. What distinguishes this phase from previous controversies is its quietness. No dramatic rupture, no viral implosion, just a steady narrowing of options. A recalibration happening in spreadsheets, not statements. And that silence is telling. Because when an industry stops reacting emotionally, it has already decided rationally. This is the space Meghan Markle and Prince Harry now occupy. Still famous, still influential, but no longer exempt, no longer buffered by novelty or symbolism, operating under the same conditions as every other creator competing for attention in an overcrowded marketplace. That transition, from protected prominence to competitive exposure, is the true significance of this moment, and it sets the stage for what comes next. Not a collapse, not a comeback, but a test. A test of whether a brand built on personal narrative can transform into one built on durable relevance, and whether reinvention is still possible once the safety net is gone.
The royal family is doing, but actually it was all rubbish. It looked awful. It tasted awful for a lot of people who tried it out.
As Netflix stepped back, the consequences didn't stay confined to one contract. They rippled outward, exposing how much of the Sussex strategy depended on perception rather than infrastructure. Exclusivity deals do more than fund projects. They provide predictability. They allow delays. They absorb mistakes. Without that cushion, every decision suddenly carries weight. Development slows. Hiring becomes cautious. Long-term planning turns reactive. Industry sources describe this phase as operational strain rather than public collapse. The optics remain polished, but behind the scenes, pressure mounts. At the center of that pressure is identity. For years, Meghan Markle and Prince Harry positioned themselves as moral narrators operating outside traditional systems. That framing resonated early, especially with audiences drawn to reinvention and institutional critique. But branding experts now argue the message struggled to evolve. The story stayed the same. The world moved on. Audience research reportedly showed a growing divide, a loyal core that remained deeply supportive, and a much larger group that quietly disengaged. Casual viewers sampled content, then drifted away. In streaming economics, that distinction matters. Loyalty sustains communities. Scale sustains platforms. Netflix's recalibration reflects this reality. Executives aren't reacting to controversy, they're reacting to data, completion rates, repeat viewing, cost per minute watched. These metrics don't measure sentiment, they measure behavior. And behavior shifted.
She's a warm, nice, careful person who wants to really please you. You feel that she wants to grab it, she'll get the money, and then to go on to the next thing. I think that...
At the same time, every Sussex project carried outsized scrutiny. Where other producers are allowed to fail quietly and adjust, these releases unfolded under a microscope. Success was amplified. Weaknesses were magnified. There was no room for experimentation. This environment makes reinvention harder, not easier. Observers now describe the brand as caught between two risks. Lean too heavily into personal narrative, and fatigue deepens. Pull too far away, and the core audience feels abandoned. The path forward requires restraint, something rarely rewarded in an attention-driven economy. And yet, restraint may be the only option left. The media ecosystem has changed. Audiences are more selective. Celebrity confessionals no longer dominate conversation. Authenticity alone is insufficient without novelty, tension, or transformation. This isn't about punishment. It's about saturation.
I think he will be even less than a spare when his brother takes the throne. I don't think his brother will give him the time.
For the first time since stepping away from royal life, Meghan Markle and Prince Harry are operating without symbolic leverage. They are no longer exceptions. They are participants. And participation demands results. What comes next will likely be quieter. Smaller projects, strategic partnerships, less spectacle, more discipline. Not because ambition is gone, but because insulation is. The question is no longer whether they can command attention, it's whether they can sustain it. The final phase of this story isn't defined by contracts or commentators. It's defined by consequence. For years, the Sussex strategy followed a clear logic: exchange institutional privilege for independent influence, then convert that influence into lasting cultural power. Netflix was the cornerstone of that vision. Its withdrawal didn't just weaken a deal, it exposed how much rested on that single pillar. Now, the landscape looks different. Meghan Markle and Prince Harry remain globally recognizable, but recognition alone no longer guarantees leverage. They have supporters, but not enough to ensure mass-market success across platforms. They possess influence, but it is increasingly constrained by expectations shaped by their own history. Every future move is now weighed twice, once on merit and again against what came before. Financially, this requires recalibration, not panic. The era of automatic premium partnerships appears to be closing, replaced by performance-based opportunity.
They were obsessed with the royal family.
Analysts suggest diversification is essential. Smaller budgets, broader creative scope, less dependence on singular deals. That shift demands something more difficult than reinvention. It demands humility. Public trust also plays a decisive role. Years of hyper-visibility created intimacy, but also exhaustion. Re-engaging audiences now requires subtraction as much as addition. Silence must be intentional, not evasive. Visibility must feel earned, not expected. There are no villains left in this story. No palace to challenge, no tabloids to dismantle, no system to rebel against. Only structure. Algorithms don't care about intention. Budgets don't respond to symbolism. Platforms don't reward legacy. They reward performance. That is the reality the Sussex brand now faces. And yet, this moment is not an ending. It is a narrowing of options that clarifies what matters. Craft over commentary. Consistency over spectacle. Work over narrative. History shows that public figures survive transitions like this, not by doubling down on grievance or grandeur, but by rebuilding quietly, by letting output speak, by accepting that relevance must be renewed, not defended. Whether Meghan Markle and Prince Harry choose that path remains unresolved. But one thing is clear: the era of automatic amplification is over. What comes next will be written under the same conditions faced by every other creator competing for attention in a crowded marketplace. And in that equality, stripped of protection, privilege, and presumption, lies both the risk and the opportunity that now define their future.